Thank you very much for the introduction there, Alistair. My name is Dominic Armato, and while I've spent the last 20 years as a food writer and professional dining critic for multiple publications in Phoenix, Arizona, that's probably not how you know me, and I'm pretty sure that's not why they asked me to be here. In a previous life, I spent a couple of decades as a voice actor. And I have what I like to think are some fairly solid credits to my name, but you most likely know me as the voice of this guy. Guybrush Threepwood, for his video, where it's a protagonist of the Monkey Island series and everybody's favorite aspiring pirate. So before I get into the meat of this presentation, I have one other quick question I just need to get out of the way. Are there any Monkey Island fans out here? This is very good because at the risk of oversharing, I have been extremely anxious about this presentation, and my coping mechanism while preparing for it has been to tell myself that if I come up like really short of my allotted time, or if this thing completely crashes and burns, then the absolute worst case scenario is that I can just sort of awkwardly segue into doing a Q&A and chew up the rest of the time like being charming and telling Monkey Island war stories. So to be clear, when I ask this, it isn't to get you fired up, and it isn't to stoke my own ego. It's because what I'm doing is I'm seeking reassurance that in fact my escape hatch is there. So thank you for that. Yes, I'm gonna need that. My anxiety about this presentation is in no small part due to the fact that this is the first, not exactly the first. I did once speak to the Newcomers Club of Scottsdale on the topic of the importance of supporting local independent restaurants, which you can at least appreciate in spirit, I would expect. But it was a long time ago. It was a topic that I had been actively ranting about for decades at that point. So really, the only toughest part of that presentation was figuring out how to squeeze in everything that I wanted to say all at once. Plus, the Newcomers Club was this small room full of mostly freshly retired senior citizens who had just moved to this sunny, beautiful paradise. And judging from their reactions, I think an audience with the local newspaper critic was like the highlight of their month. So honestly, if I got up there and I'd read menu descriptions for 20 minutes, they would have been completely thrilled. So the stakes were low. This, on the other hand, is another beast entirely, which is going to become relevant in a moment. When Tom asked me if I would be interested in delivering a presentation at AdventureX, I mean, this is an instant yes, right? You don't say no to an opportunity like that. So as soon as I could clear the dates, I told him, absolutely, I will be there. And it was only later, once I started to sort of digest the tremendous bite that I had just taken there, that's when I realized that this would be no small handful of sunny elderly Scottsdalians. I would have to prepare and travel halfway around the world to present 45 minutes worth of engaging material for a professional conference of game devs, the people who actually produce the games that I dream of working on, in a format that would then be immortalized on the internet for God knows how many people more to pick it apart and look at it. So now, I'm not a panicky and anxious individual inherently by nature, but I'm not gonna lie, this is where I started to panic a little bit. So to help me get started, I procured this little gizmo here. This is my actual panic button. So I can just listen here and calm down a little bit. Center. Okay. But so the good thing about this is where I would vent my anxiety as I'm preparing this thing. So the good thing about it is it kind of helps me get that out. But the downside is that this is just an anxiety venter. This is not an idea producer. So I still had to come up with a presentation for you people. And I thought to myself, can I really manage 45 minutes? Is there anything that I can say that a whole bunch of game devs are gonna actually care about? And that is how I landed on the topic of my presentation, Impostor Syndrome. So I might be going out on a limb here, but if I look over a crowd of often introverted creative types who probably grew up with their faces buried in computer games and are now trying to live up to the legacy of their childhood idols in a scrappy little corner of a merciless industry, I'm gonna guess that some of you probably have a little bit of experience with imposter syndrome, a few maybe. And really, I was thinking, what could be more compelling and relatable than a crippling neurosis shared by presenter and audience alike? So that's what I'm gonna talk about, and Guybrush, but we'll get to him in just a little bit. Now, for those blessed individuals out there who have not had the pleasure of becoming acquainted with our dear friend, Impostor Syndrome, a brief technical introduction, and this is where it's gonna get a little dry and boring, but just for a minute. So, while not formally recognized as a diagnosed condition, Impostor syndrome is a phenomenon wherein, despite all external evidence to the contrary, people undervalue their skills and accomplishments to the point where they start to feel that they are not valuable practitioners within their field, but rather imposters who have only achieved success by hiding or compensating for their shortcomings, and they're in danger of being exposed for the frauds that they truly are. So put another way, it's holy crap, I actually suck what I do, and I've been fooling everybody this whole time, and as soon as everyone figures that out, I'm completely doomed. And while imposter syndrome tends to manifest in people who exhibit neuroticism, perfectionism, or low self-esteem, it is by no means limited to those cohorts. In fact, psychologists Pauline Rose Clance and Gail Matthews suggest that 70% of the population will experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. You may note, however, that Clance and Matthews' study did not address how confident they were in their own expertise. But setting aside the more clinical speak, it would seem this is a rather common sentiment that most of us can relate to, at least a little bit. And when I say most of us, that includes no small number of fabulously accomplished individuals. Maya Angelou, despite being one of the most beloved and lauded poets of our time, said that with each successive book she published, her fears of being uncovered as a fraud would only grow. Albert Einstein, despite completely redefining our understanding of space and time, once wrote, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." And speaking of space and time, David Bowie, whose mere existence is now widely credited with holding the fabric of the universe together and temporarily saving us all from the worst of all possible timelines, suffered from imposter syndrome. Everything is awful. But as tempting as it might be to make light of a little self-deprecating anxiety, the truth is that imposter syndrome can be a terrible, terrible thing to deal with, not only causing undue angst and suffering, but also turning into a self-fulfilling prophecy that holds us back from achieving things of which we are, in fact, quite capable. But you all know this. After all, you're game developers. To help me understand the details of how you all might be feeling, I decided to go straight to the source, Tom Hardwich. Now, most of you know Tom as the pretty swell fellow behind Tall Story Games, who released Lucid Dreaming to great acclaim. And then he promptly buried himself in not one, but two more games, not to mention helping to organize the convention that we are all attending here right now. All which is to say is that his Google profile has increased markedly over the past few years. So I asked him about that experience and what it felt like to suddenly be an indie darling of a scene in which he'd previously been an outsider.
With indie devs, so many independent developers don't ever get to the point where they're actually in a position to ship their game.
Right.
So as soon as you've shipped one, you're suddenly kind of in a whole nother tier of like, okay, this is a developer who's actually made a game, finished it, and shipped it in whatever state it's in. It's out there, and that puts you in the kind of top sort of few percent of indie game developers immediately. So then you're surrounded by a lot of much more talented, much more respected, much more experienced people than you, but you're sort of in kind of thrashing around in the same bucket. So you get people, people like you'll end up like on a panel. I was on a panel with Tony Warrener and Dave Gilbert, and I'm like, what?
Exactly. And even though I think Tom kind of relishes his role as outsider a little bit, he was deliciously candid with me about the times when that can definitely make for some awkward moments and some awkward feelings.
I knew another developer that I met at an event there, and he's like, oh, we should go out for a drink. So, okay, fine. Went out for a drink, and some other guys kind of walked in, and he's like, oh, yeah, you come over, and they were chatting about stuff. And they were talking about whatever, again, games industry, word salad. I was like, oh, okay, they're obviously working somewhere. And they started telling me about their game, their company that they worked at, which was a place called Rockstar. Now, yeah, I had never heard of Rockstar. This is only a couple of years ago, but I'd never heard of it. And I didn't make a point of that. I didn't kind of.
Right.
I was. And I think they would have thought I was just joking if I had, but I'm now going, oh, kind of, oh, well done you, you've done, oh. And they're like, oh yeah, and we did, we've done this and we've done that. I was like, oh, Yeah, I think I've heard. Oh yeah, yeah. And then, but it was sort of straight, and that's where the kind of the imposter syndrome definitely sort of rears its ugly head. Is that it's not that I feel like I'm. That's where I feel like I'm an imposter. I feel like I'm sitting like I'm in on. I've walked into the wrong meeting and I'm there and I've now and I can't leave because that's just awkward. And I've just got to kind of smile and nod and pretend that I know what I'm talking about.
So, okay, but it's only natural, perhaps, that an indie dev in the middle of a rapid rise might feel like a fish out of water a little bit. So I also kind of wanted to discuss this with a dev who has a little more experience. So I called up an old friend of mine, Jake Rodkin. Now, Jake is, by any objective definition, a tremendously successful game developer. I met Jake shortly after I first voiced Guybrush, where he and a ragtag crew of these geeky teenagers were running the International House of Mojo, a LucasArts fan site back in the day. So we met up at E3. I invited them over to my house for pasta. We ended up going out to Disneyland. It was a good time had by all. And it is no exaggeration, in all sincerity, to say that one of like the little joys of my life has been watching him go on to do some of the coolest shit I've ever seen in video games. Jake started his professional career managing marketing and online fan communities for Telltale Games, where he eventually wheedled his way into his first development role, including co-project lead on Tales of Monkey Island. So then he and Sean Vanneman left Telltale to launch Campo Santo, where they made Firewatch, which I love, one of my favorite games of all time, and for which he won a flipping BAFTA, by the way, jeez. And now he's over at Valve, and I have no idea what he's working on, so don't ask. and we will all find out about it together when they announce it in 2037 or whatever. But the point is, Jake has had the kind of career that most aspiring game devs would absolutely kill for. So I asked him how he feels about his success.
There are times when my brain completely is corroded by my belief that I am nothing and that I'm a piece of dirt. But there are also times when that's totally not the case, and it's sometimes surprising when one is or one isn't.
And with apologies to Jake, this is a little mean of me to lead with him at his most self-deprecating. He is extremely good at being self-deprecating. But the point is, yes, tremendously talented, successful people deal with these feelings. You know, you are not alone. And that bit highlights one of the things that to me is so fascinating about imposter syndrome is that how two things can be true. You can know on one level that you're pretty good at what you do, and yet you can still experience these waves of those feelings even long after there's any question about your skill and your value. So here's a little bit more from Jake.
For me, I don't know that I'm ever going to somehow feel, what's the exact word? It's not like good about myself. I think I'm pretty good at my job, but like, right. I don't think the route that I've taken in my life to have the job that I have means that there are just objectively going to end up being weird holes in my experience, and just I am nothing but the sum of my parts. Like, it is a situation where, you know, I think a lot of people who would describe themselves as people with some degree of imposter syndrome or whatever else their adjacent bubble in the imposter verse is, I think most of those people do believe they are good at what they do and that they have all these skills that they are pretty proud of. But then it is sort of the quantum undermining of it.
This clip was unfortunately cut short when Agent Smith walked by. There was a pretty tremendous fight scene thereafter, but rest assured, Jake won. It's all good. So, in any case, I feel this. I really feel this. Even when you have years, if not decades of experience, and every reason to believe that you do good work, that experience of undermining yourself, quantum undermining I love, by the way. That's my band name for the week. The experience of undermining yourself with feelings that you're a secret fraud can be absolutely crippling, and it can make our lives and our work so much harder than they need to be. Ask me how I know. Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. Now, this presentation isn't about me, and I will do my best not to drag out the autobiographical segment. But before I delve into the Threepwood Method, I feel I should share my personal experience with imposter syndrome to both establish my bona fides and also demonstrate that should you also suffer this affliction, believe me, I understand and I am with you. And moreover, I like to think that I have sort of a particularly broad perspective on this subject, given that I've had the distinct pleasure of experiencing imposter syndrome in not one, but two wildly different, divergent, public-facing professions. I was a tiny little wee amateur journalist who had been running food blogs and community discussion websites when the Arizona Republic came calling in 2015. And they convinced me to apply for their soon-to-be vacated role of dining critic, and I accepted their offer. And overnight, I went from this small-time culinary hobbyist and rabble-rouser to a full-time food writer and professional dining critic at one of the largest newspapers in the United States. So here I am with no professional journalistic experience, no journalism degree, not even an undergrad degree, and I'm suddenly one of the highest profile people in the newsroom trying to keep my head down while working with grizzled 40-year veterans of the industry. And let me tell you, there is nothing that grizzled 40-year veterans of a besieged industry love more than when management plucks some undereducated rando out of obscurity and starts making this kind of a fuss over the changing of the guard. And that was the actual headline. So I'm told that at one point the marketing department considered plastering my face on the side of a bus that they wanted to drive all around town, which in addition to making one a little self-conscious, is also super not helpful when you're a dining critic who's trying to maintain a low profile when you go on TV. So, to give you a sense of just how hilariously green I was in this job, maybe about 6 months or so in, I managed to get a hold of this particularly juicy news story. It was a really good one. And so I did all my interviews and I wrote the piece up and I filed my piece, and then my editor came to me and said, well, you know, should we run this thing now or can we hold it until the food and dining section next week? And I was like, so, you know, I'd really love to save it for the food and dining section, but I feel like word is kind of starting to get around, and I'm afraid if we don't run it tomorrow, we might get scooped. Do we actually say that, or is that just in the movies? She's like, no, we actually say that. That's a real thing. And she said, you said it just right. I'm like, okay, phew, all right, good. So looking back at my time at the newspaper now, I think I did a pretty good job of it, but it was terrifying. And let me also say that if you're someone who is prone to suffering imposter syndrome, dining critic is the role for you, because when you're a dining critic, merely being competent is wildly insufficient. You are expected to be the expert, the authoritative voice of God from on high about everything. And one of my personal missions in taking that job was to kind of demystify the role a bit and try to knock the stereotypical old school critic down off the pedestal, but still, there's this tremendous pressure to know what you're talking about. And that's when you get into problems of overcompensation. So I started getting a little obsessed, and I started keeping a log of every single dish I tasted. And I was working 60 plus hours a week, not because the newspaper demanded it, but because that was how much time I had to put in to feel like I was doing the right amount of research to make up for my own perceived shortcomings. So in the 5 years that I worked for the Arizona Republic, I want to make sure I get this right, I tried 12,718 restaurant dishes. And I have a spreadsheet with every single one of them, which I maintain to this day, but we're not going to talk about that. And that number would have been a whole lot higher if it weren't for the pandemic lockdown. And my biggest issue was that the newspaper insisted on having tons of top 10 lists. And I became obsessed with this fear that I would miss someplace, you know, and people would be like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How did you miss this incredible restaurant? So again, the overcompensation, I started maintaining this massive list of all the places I had to go, and it just grew and grew and grew. And for every one that I'd visit, I'd end up adding 3 more. So by the time I left the Republic, this was the short version of my to-do list. And this is a teeny, teeny, tiny fraction of the number of restaurants that I actually visited. And the point is that when you're suffering from imposter syndrome, you can be crushed by this compulsion to overcompensate. And it can crush you in other ways too. Pardon me a second. So it may or may not come as a surprise that I have felt at times over the years deeply unworthy of my place as the caretaker of the role of Guybrush Threepwood. But to understand my anxiety surrounding this, you have to understand the context. These days, now, it's completely second nature. I've accepted and gotten comfortable with the fact that Guybrush is part of me and vice versa, and it only took me about 30 years to get to that place. But that wasn't always the case. Of course, you recall that the first 2 Monkey Island games, originally they weren't voiced. So by the time I stepped in, it was already a beloved franchise with a rabid fan base, of which I was a member. I was one of those hugely rabid Monkey Island fans. And I had grown up with and developed this personal attachment to the series. and I understood a little too well, the pitfalls of stepping into a role like that and the expectations of putting an unfamiliar voice on a character that people have already spent weeks and months and years within their minds. So I knew the stakes, and they were terrifying, and I wish that I could say that I attacked this role with Guybrushtian bravado, but the truth is that it was really, really scary. And it turned out well. Most of you seem pretty much okay with my work, and I appreciate that, and I can't express the amount of relief that brings me. And you would think that getting a role like that when you're 19 years old, and by most accounts doing it justice, would instill some confidence and like make you feel like you're squarely on the path. But just a couple years later, when I was working on another game, I had this encounter with Impostor Syndrome that shaped me, and not for the better in any way. While we were working on Escape from Monkey Island, one of my sessions was booked back-to-back with Tom Kane. I don't know if that's a name that people still recognize, but he was tremendous, especially in the 90s and the aughts, did a ton of stuff for LucasArts, and he was a legend. And after my session was done, they invited me to stick around and listen for a while he did a number of random, droids roles for all the games they were working on at the time. And watching him work was at the same time, it was inspiring and it was crushing because it showed me just how talented some of the voiceover greats are. But what I found so amazing is that Tom could do anything. It was like they give him a little character description, like a little physical description, a little bit of background, and then he'd kind of sit there in front of the microphone for like 10 or 15 seconds with this furrowed brow. Okay. All right, yeah, okay. And then this moment the engineer said, okay, we're rolling, bam, and he'd nail it. And it was like first take, perfect take every single time, and it just blew my mind. And occasionally he'd be like, make him like 6 inches taller, put a little hair on his chest, and he'd do it again, perfect, every single time. And what I felt watching him in that moment wasn't, wow, I want to get that good. I am a little embarrassed to admit that how I felt was more, holy shit, I can never be that good. And as a young actor who is still relatively new to character work in LA, I had a really hard time shaking that for a very long time. And it made me question whether I belonged as someone who had a future in this profession. And the shame of it is that this sense of doubt was so completely needless and completely self-inflicted because I hadn't made it. I was actually there in LA, starring in a LucasArts game. I'm playing Major League Ball, and I'm feeling like I can't do this because I'm not Mickey Mantle. And that's a feeling it's hard to shake. I'm sorry. Oh my God, I collect myself here. Very sorry. Did not see that coming. Was not overwhelmed in practice. So that's not the reason that I moved home and eventually kind of stepped away from voiceover, but it's not the reason either. And what's really incredible to me is, at the risk of really, really oversharing and exposing myself, is that even though I can see it and identify it and put together a hopefully 45 minutes long presentation about it, this feeling clearly is still with me 3 decades later. I've been telling myself that I really should try actively working in the games industry again. For 15 years I've been telling myself. And that's how long it took me to take this first step, which is getting back in the booth and recording my first new voiceover demo since 2002, which for me is a big deal, right? And I finally did it about a month ago. So now after all this time, the thing that I have in my head is, oh God, is this any good? Can I look back on decades of experience and believe that I can bring something to the table? And can I actually do this work? And the truth is, I have absolutely no idea. I still don't. I just posted this thing, and I can't tell if this is like my triumphant return to voiceover, or if this is gonna be like an epic face plant in the making. Because I still, even after all this time, really, it's hard for me to feel like I belong. And I know I'm not the only person. So, unless we're talking about Guybrush, because that's like a whole other thing, and I'm pretty sure I have him down at this point. I feel pretty good about that one. And in his fictional world, he himself is a rather successful figure, despite being vastly underqualified for his chosen profession, at least by any conventional measure. And that is what gave me a glimmer of an idea. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Threepwood Method. The Threepwood Method is, put simply, a collection of strategies for setting aside self-doubt and pushing through imposter syndrome, inspired by the greatest bungling buccaneer of all time, your favorite pirate and mine, Guybrush Threepwood. And I chose Guybrush to use as an example, not just because I have long since forgotten where he ends and I begin, though that has become an occupational hazard over the years, but because, and I absolutely do not say this to diminish him in any way, Guybrush is the ultimate imposter. When we first meet him, I want to make sure I get all this. When we first meet him, he washes up on the shores of Melee Island with no history, no pedigree, no money, no prospects, no map, no ship, no crew, and no discernible skills other than a penchant for smartassery and possibly some specialized knowledge about flooring construction, but we aren't even 100% certain about that. He is neither ruthless nor cruel, nor particularly adept at swordplay. He can't stand the sight of blood, and he can't hold his liquor. He is, with the possible exception of Wally B. Feed, the least qualified to be a pirate of all of his contemporaries. And yet, not only does he succeed in becoming one, but he eventually evolves into what is arguably one of the most infamous pirates in the history of the Tri-Island area. Maybe not infamous in the way he would prefer, but infamous nonetheless. And this is no small accomplishment. And the question is, how? How has someone with no piratey qualifications of any kind managed to pull the wool over our eyes for 35 years? And it has been that long. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm right there with you. So aside, what kind of mojo is it that he's got, aside from the actual mojo, that he's conjured up that allows him to breeze through this cutthroat world of piracy without being crushed by the weight of the fact that he has absolutely no business being there? Or, put another way, what would Guybrush do? And this here is the key to the Threepwood Method. If Guybrush were a dining critic who had been thrust into the world of professional journalism without any training, formal or otherwise, if he were a voice actor with pangs of self-doubt who was attempting to make a comeback after a very long layoff, if he were an independent game developer who was trying to navigate an unforgiving industry while measuring himself against the titans of his youth, what would he do? So in preparation for today, I have plumbed the depths of the Threepwood Ove with the help of some rather kind folks on social media. Thank you all. And I've assembled a combination of psychologist-recommended behaviors and personal observations about combating imposter syndrome as expressed in Guybrushtian terms. So without further ado, here is the Threepwood Method in 6 not-so-simple steps. Step 1, be unconventional. Or to put it another way, qualifications, schmalifications. Now, for most of you, I'm guessing I probably don't need to enumerate the myriad ways Guybrush accomplishes his goals by unconventional means. But for those who might be unfamiliar, the entire point of the games is to do exactly that. He makes up for his questionable swordplay skills by demoralizing his opponents with withering insults. He banishes an evil ghost pirate with a spray bottle of root beer. He steals another pirate's golden tooth not by socking him in the face and taking it, but by giving him a jawbreaker to eat which knocks out the tooth, giving him some gum so he blows a bubble with the tooth inside, popping the bubble, picking up the lost tooth, jamming it in a wad of gum, inhaling a helium balloon, blowing the gum into a bubble that floats the tooth out the window where it falls into a bud hole, and he can pan for gold with a pie tin. And before anybody accuses me of spoiling puzzles, I dare anyone who has not played the game to come up to me tomorrow and repeat this. I worked on the game for 3 months, and then when it came out, I had completely forgotten how to solve this puzzle. Guybrush's shtick is that he achieves piratey ends by decidedly non-piratey means, which is to say that the images we construct in our heads of how somebody who does what we do should or should not do it are usually bullshit. Plundering and pillaging and skewering people who get in your way, that's one way to do about it, sure. But the world is jam-packed with people who came to their work by unconventional paths with unconventional training and who succeed by doing unconventional things. And the bottom line is, if you're doing the thing, nobody cares how. Just keep doing it. Because your methods are unconventional, that doesn't make them invalid. And sometimes that's precisely what makes your contribution so unique and so valuable. Step 2, be oblivious. This is where I need to remind myself to breathe. Now, to be clear, I don't mean be oblivious to your surroundings, nor do I mean not so subtle cues dropped by your significant other, although Guybrush does excel at that as well. What I mean is that while Guybrush is the OG imposter, the degree to which he is aware of this fact vacillates. He is in a constant state of faking it, intentionally or not. And while he has his moments of clarity and self-doubt, he succeeds, I think, largely because he forgets that he is an imposter. Put another way, while he's often brimming with his ebullient bravado, Guybrush isn't confident in his abilities so much as he is oblivious to his limitations. And I realize that's a very subtle distinction, but I do think it's an important one. There is a trope that I'm sure you all know that younger creative types will sometimes do these amazing, fantastic, groundbreaking things simply because they haven't yet learned that they aren't supposed to be capable of them, right? With huge air quotes around supposed to. And even when you don't feel it deep down inside, I think there is tremendous value in trying to actively cultivate that vibe and create, how to describe this, sort of like a compartmentalized ignorance within yourself, like a virtual machine where you can role play and make pretend decisions as though you are the kind of person who believes you can do anything, and then step outside of that box and actually make those decisions, which is admittedly a hard thing to do. And despite your best efforts, sometimes you're going to be overwhelmed by feelings of inadequacy, which brings us to step 3. Be honest. Now, I realize that when we're talking about Guybrush's character traits, honesty is not usually high on the list.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes?
Aren't you Guybrush Threepwood?
No, my name is Smith. Herman Toothrot. Biff from the polo team. Jucius Maximus III.
P. Hamilton Good Soup.
Andrew LeChuck. No relation.
Loogie. Captain Loogie.
I'm Bobbin. Are you my mother?
But what I'm actually... That was like 80% of the time I put into this presentation was finding all those clips and playing through the games and then cutting them together. But what I'm referring to is being honest about how you feel, both to yourself and to other people who you trust. And this can get kind of rough.
I can't compete with LeChuck or Madison, let alone both. They've got crews. They've got ships. They've got supernatural magic powers. I've got some crackers and 2 monocles.
And your charming personality.
Might as well just lie here and starve to death.
Narrative gaming is at its best when it hits a little too close to home. But the point here is that one of the best things you can do to fight imposter syndrome is to identify it, name it, and then talk honestly about how it makes you feel. And unlike most of my armchair psychology light here, this is an actual strategy suggested by actual psychologists who actually know what they're talking about. What makes challenges like imposter syndrome so insidious is those mental distortions, the ways that your brain lies to you and tells you things that just aren't true. And the best way to combat that is radical honesty.
In the moment when I handle myself the best, it's when I actually am able to catch that I'm doing it and just stop and tell the person, like, I actually need a second to process this. I'm overwhelming myself.
And that's it right there. Recognizing your condition, recognizing those distortions, identifying the lies that you tell yourself, and how they make you feel is absolutely critical in navigating your way through them. And it will set you up for one of the most difficult steps, step 4. Be resilient. This is something Guybrush is really good at.
I'll never get the secret now that the map is gone.
Come what you say, well?
Hello?
Murray, is that the map to the secret?
Most of us do not back bounce this easily, especially those of us over 40, not from compound fractures. But I think one of the key parts of being resilient is giving yourself permission to suck. This is important. And if you have trouble giving yourself permission, please allow me to do so right here and now. Ladies and gentlemen of AdventureX, it is okay to suck sometimes. First, because if you are somebody who suffers from imposter syndrome, what you consider sucking is probably not actually sucking. But secondly, and even more importantly, because everybody sucks sometimes.
That'll teach you to mess with the slayer of the ghost pirate LeChuck.
What's that? You killed LeChuck?
As a matter of fact, I did. quite an interesting story, actually.
The fortune teller said she did in LeChuck.
She did she? Does she have one of these?
Is that?
Yes, LeChuck's beard. Still alive and wriggling.
Let me see that. Whoa, it is alive. We've been looking for a living piece of LeChuck for years. Now we can bring it back to life. Look out, world! The most fearsome pirate of all time will soon sail the seas again.
Whoops.
Have you ever been so busy bragging that you failed to realize you're enabling the reanimation of your arch-enemy's shambling zombie corpse? No! Congratulations! You have probably never sucked that badly. But even if you have to give yourself permission to make those mistakes and then bounce back and then move on. I have voice work out there that was published under an alias and that I hope none of you ever discover, and I'm just going to leave that at that. But while it's important to recognize and put our failures into perspective, it is just as important that we do the same with our successes, which brings us to step 5. Step 5, be proud. Here's something that Guybrush is, of course, very good at.
Elaine, I'm a man of action, a swashbuckler, a rogue, a wanderer, a man who can hold his breath for 10 minutes. I have no ties and no regrets. I sail with the wind and go where adventure takes me.
Now, I realize that telling somebody with imposter syndrome to be proud is a little like telling somebody who's suffering from depression to just be happy. But the point is, do what you can. Take baby steps. It's okay if your pride manifests less like Guybrush and a little more like this guy. Now, the point is that I want you to take time to identify and bask in your successes, however small or large they are. You got to take a victory lap, hoist a mug of grog, celebrate however you prefer to celebrate, but the key is to recognize and remind yourself that you do, in fact, do good things. Because not only do you do good things, but at the risk of repeating myself here, they are probably much better than you think they are. And your friends and colleagues will tell you so. But that kind of reinforcement doesn't even have to come in the form of explicit praise.
We all still talk to each other. None of us work at Telltale anymore because that version of Telltale has been gone for years.
Right.
But you know, whatever, all of us who did that job around that time, we all still talk to each other and ask for advice and talk about what each other's projects are. They ask me questions, so I have to assume intellectually that they believe that I am capable of this.
Newsflash, community is good. Never stop reminding yourself that you are part of your community for a reason. And the fact that they value you and what you think, even when you're struggling to see the value in yourself, speaks volumes. And for what it's worth, I will tell you, I have seen your games and they are endlessly astounding to me and I desperately want to be in all of them. And the only thing I don't like about them is I'm so busy dealing with my own neuroses that I don't have enough time to play them all. I own them all, but I haven't played them all. So when you're suffering from imposter syndrome, your natural tendency is to wallow and obsess over your defeats while conveniently ignoring your victories. And it's critical that you're aware of that impulse and resist it and find some balance by allowing yourself to be proud of your wins. And one of the best tools in your arsenal to help you do that is the subject of our final step. Step 6, be funny. Guybrush is funny, both intentionally and unintentionally. And some of us are naturally better at this than others, but find what you have, whatever it is, and use it for 2 reasons. First, because people notice your perceived inadequacies less if you are making them laugh. It's true, there's an entire profession completely devoted to this ethos, and we call it stand-up comedy. When my kids were small, one of the lessons that I drilled into them was, if you're gonna get in trouble, try to at least make it funny. Because if you make it really funny, there's a chance you might get away with it. So, a few years later, after imparting this lesson, my son is in his mid-teens and he was seeing a counselor on a weekly basis who was really big on mindfulness. So she would do these mindfulness exercises with him, and she had these little props that were supposed to help. I guess they were these sort of these meditative aids. There were these weights that were black and silver, and they sort of vibrated gently, and they had these really nice quality speakers built in, and they would play like these Zen water chimes or something like that. So there was one week where she told him that he could take them home, you know, kind of practice his little mindfulness exercises at home with the water chime weights. And being mechanically inclined as he is, he decided to pop them open and figure out how they worked, which he did. And he discovered that the chimes were just MP3 clips that were stored on an internal SD card. And there were about 30 clips, and they were each about 3 minutes long. And the speakers would just shuffle them and play them at random. So before he gave them back, he deleted one of the 30 MP3s, and he replaced it with this. He did not get in trouble for that one. The real tragedy is that his counselor had never heard of Rick Astley. So this is perhaps a bit tangential, and maybe it's an excuse for me to brag about my kid. But the point is that people will forgive an awful lot if you can be a little funny. Now, not all of us are that funny. I'm pretty sure I'm not that funny, and that part of being funny is like, that's kind of a part of my job. But the second reason to be funny is that your audience doesn't necessarily have to be anybody other than yourself. The difference between wallowing in self-pity and exercising a little bit of introspective self-deprecation is humor. So even if you're the only person who laughs, it's still worthwhile to be able to find a little humor in your quirks and your missteps to help you, step 3, be honest, and step 4, be resilient. And that's the Threepwood Method for, excuse me, that's the Threepwood Method for defeating imposter syndrome. Blah, blah, blah. I hope maybe you can find a little bit of inspiration, or at least a bit of a chuckle in this, and that our favorite pirate wannabe can help you lend a little comfort from time to time. That said, again, I don't think it's imposter syndrome talking. I'm pretty sure when I say that I'm not a doctor or a researcher or a psychologist, and I'm way out of my depth on this subject. There are many excellent resources out there for people who struggle with this that are produced by actual experts in the field who actually know what they're talking about. So if you're someone who suffers from this, I would encourage you, please go out and speak to someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Which is all to say, yes, I am worried that you've all seen right through my sorry attempt of a presentation about imposter syndrome, and I will toss that little nugget of security on my own little pile here. So I think what I'm really hoping you take away is that those of us who struggle with these feelings are legion. You're not alone. You're not unique. Many, if not most of us, feel the exact same way. And ironically, that's maybe the strongest argument of all, that you're not the imposter you think you are. You think you're special? You think you're the only one who feels this way? We all feel this way. You think everybody else knows what they're doing and you are the only one who's actually the imposter? You're not a special, unique flower. You are just as talented and capable and valuable as the rest of us. So deal with it. I'm pretty sure there's not a medical association anywhere that endorses that kind of therapy. But look, find what works for you, even if it's that, and just keep going. Take a little cue from Guybrush and keep on doing awesome things, even if they don't always feel awesome to you, because odds are they are awesome to somebody else. And that's it. Thanks, everybody.